Hey, everybody. Welcome to Terror Talk with Shannon and Kathy.
Yo.
Hello. Happy day. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the true crime story behind the Netflix 2022 series called The Watcher.
I liked this series.
Was that your first exposure to sort of the story? It was mine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it made me much more curious about it, but until we did this episode, because I watched the series a while back, until we started to research for this episode, I didn't know as much.
Me neither. I remembered that you had watched the series in 2022, and I had not. I think I had watched one or maybe like the first episode or something, and I just didn't have time for it at the time. It wasn't that it was bad or anything. I just was like, okay, maybe I just wasn't in the mood for it. But then we scheduled it as an episode, and so then that forces us to watch certain things or finish certain things that we have not. So I just binged it. So we're going to talk about what we know about the true story and also the series and our reactions to that, and then maybe some differences as well.
I like that plan.
Cool. This is actually the story of Derek and Maria Broaddus and their 3 children who purchased, their dream home in New Jersey at 657 Boulevard, Westfield, New Jersey, which is a hoity-toity area at the time anyway. I don't know what it's like now. Although this is a really, actually very recent story in the last decade or so. So it's not one of those oldies like we normally do. So they began to receive letters that were ominous and appeared to be from a stalker. You know what's interesting about this, though, too, is that there was this anonymous letter that comes, right? And it says things like, my grandpa watched the house in the 20s, my father watched the house in the 60s, and now it's my time, and, I'm going to find out why you're here, and all this kind of like real paranoia.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff. This is this first letter, right?
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, they get a second letter, and it talks about the nicknames of their children. So not just their names, but they had a 5, 8, and 10-year-old at the time. And it actually brings up their nicknames. And I guess that's what spooked them as well.
Like somebody's listening.
Yeah. Like how would they know the nickname, listening, or they know them from school, or, who knows? And then I guess they find out that the previous owners had gotten a letter like a couple of weeks before they were moving out. Like the house is maybe already sold or maybe not sold. I don't know. There was a lawsuit later where they sued the previous owners. Like, you knew about this and you still sold us the house.
What's weird, real quickly though, I want to be clear on this, is I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that was the only letter the previous owners had gotten, correct? So it's like, I mean, you could tell the new owners, but they're sitting there going like, we've been here for 20 plus years and never received this. We're not paying it that much attention.
No, they crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, which is exactly what I would have done. And honestly, the 2 letters that they did get, I'm not sure I wouldn't have done the same thing with those letters. I just don't know how freaked out I would have gotten. But anyway. And then the third letter come to find out the dad did send in real life, that he sent it to his own family to try to get them. He was frustrated with the lack of action by the police and all of that. Because what the series doesn't represent, which makes more sense to me in the real story, is that they never moved into the house. They never actually lived in the house. They
never lived there.
So I can see the dad becoming frustrated with not being able to move into his $1.3 million home. And at that time, that was a huge sum.
Right.
10 years ago or whatever, in this one area.
Especially in that area.
Yeah. I'm not condoning his actions at all. And I wouldn't have terrorized my own family like that, of course, and ruined the case. It just creates so much suspicion that you literally, you're basically telling the cops to fuck off because you're just polluting the whole thing.
Right.
And casting suspicion on yourself by doing that. But anyway.
Well, and there was a moment there that that was a theory, right? That they believed that he had done all this just to,
To what, right? Like, that's the problem. What motive?
There was no motive.
Buys a house and then wants to sell it real fast for no apparent reason.
I never understood what they were trying to point out there, why, for what? And I think later on they do, I was watching a YouTube short like Duck on it. And they're like, later they found out that it was like, who would go to that length to destroy their own life
Yeah,
for a little bit of money?
Yeah, they didn't find anything in his personality or history or any of that. And so it's like
the only thing that they put together, which I didn't know until I watched this short thing on it, was that, and this is not evidence, this is where people can extrapolate, but it really doesn't mean anything, is that they started with like a starter home, they flipped that, and then they all of a sudden went from like a $300,000 home to a $700,000 home, and that was like their suspicion. I'm like, that's what most people do.
But that's what you do when you build wealth,
Right.
when you're trying to...
Right. And they looked at like, how all of a sudden can he afford this? Well, because you buy and flip.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way people build wealth.
And you used to be able to do that much easier.
Yeah.
People can't really flip like they did. But at that time where he was doing it,
Yeah.
that made sense.
No, that was what people were doing. So I don't know. It makes sense to me as well.
Stupid!
But I also get that they had to investigate him. Like, he sent a letter. The third letter
Yeah.
was from him. Like, I get that it's like, dude, what huh?
What are you doing?
Excuse me, sir. But I also can empathize with his frustration, because it makes more sense that he would do that in the real story than it actually does in the series. It makes more sense to me that in real life, he would be getting frustrated with and angry about not being able to move into the home that he bought, right? Like in the series, they move into the home and it makes for a much spookier kind of situation, or creepy situation, I guess. It's not very spooky. It makes for that atmosphere, I think, in the true story of like, he didn't, he wanted to move into his damn home.
Right.
And I get that. So both families were told by the police. So they take the letters to the police, and they were both told by the police to not tell their neighbors about it, because at that point, all the neighbors were suspects. And so nobody really knew about it. And the family previously that had lived there that got the letter, that is now slightly involved, was also told, like, don't tell any of the neighbors about these letters because they're all suspects now. So, of course, the family, they hire a former FBI person. They also hire a private investigator. They also have very strange neighbors. So it just goes on. And then I guess there's a fourth letter that says something about how the house misses you.
I'm trying to find that.
And you should come back, which was a real turning point for me in attempting to understand the watcher and the person behind sending the letters. Because the series really makes it out, which is, of course, fake, and I get that. The series makes it out like the motive was to get the person out, to get the family out, right? And so I had that in my head. And then I'm reading around the true story, and you think that a little bit too. But you're also aware that it's actually really about the watching. It's about the stalking and about the watching. And it never gives any indication that the grandpa, and we obviously know this could be a completely fake as well, when the guy or female or male who's writing these letters says that there might not have been a grandpa or a father watching the home, obviously. But if they were, and even if this person is, no, it's about the watching and the stalking. So the person wants the family to come back. It wants a family in the home, but then they rent it to a bunch of people.
Yeah, they do rent it to this first family, and then they also receive a letter. But that's the third letter. So is that the letter that he wrote?
I don't know. I thought it was the fourth letter that they got,
okay.
that says like, that. I don't know. I have no idea. There weren't I guess my thought is, Kathy, like, I don't know how you feel about this, but there weren't that many letters.
No.
They came over a span of time.
Yes. Oh, here's the letter. You want me to read it?
Like, what's the hullabaloo is my point, but go ahead.
657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream, the watcher wrote. I'll tell you what.
That's the second letter. By the way.
This letter, though, did freak me out. Because if the house is that big, like, okay, kids, you're not leaving my side ever.
Yeah, I understand why they didn't move in. It's very creepy. And the cops weren't able to do anything about it. But there were 4 letters, two to them, one written by the dad, and one to the renters later that were in the house a little bit later. So I don't know. And then it was eventually sold a few years back.
And what they find out eventually is that when they get DNA from the letter is that they think it's a female.
It was a female DNA.
Yeah, a female DNA. If that was the DNA of the actual writer, that's just strange because we don't usually think of someone like this as female. We would think of, when we think of perpetrators and stalkers, generally our minds go to male.
Our minds do go to male.
So just an interesting twist.
Yeah, and who knows?
Yeah.
And so when I think about the fact that this became blown up because there was an article written about it, and then it blew up in the media, and then that's how the series got made, and then it became this big thing. And those of us, you and I included, who talk about true crime pretty regularly, I'm just kind of like, and so I see why they took the idea of this story and they made it into a really fun series. But most of the fun stuff in the series is not true. Yeah. It's fiction
or completely exaggerated.
Yeah, so I do want to recommend, I don't know if you do, but I do want to recommend this series. It's just a one season, right?
And the cast is phenomenal.
Limited, whatever they call them, series these days, 8 episodes or something. And it was a real enjoyable binge for me. The Jennifer Coolidge is hilarious, and all of the actors are really good.
Margot, what's her name from? She was in Cocaine Bear too. She's really great. Yeah. The cast: Bobby Cannavale, I love. Naomi Watts. I mean, it's really strong.
Yeah, and all the quirky actors that are the neighbors, they're all really great. So we both would recommend the series for sure. But let's talk a little bit about sort of the differences, maybe. Unless you had something else to add about the true story.
It. Yeah.
Okay. The family in the true story of The Watcher, the family didn't live in the house. We've mentioned this. In the series, they live in the house. I mean, that's what makes it an interesting story, is they got to get in the house and then be creeped out, right?
Yep. Also,
in the real story, the kids actually didn't know about the letters.
They kept them away from all that.
And in the series, the girl, and this isn't spoilery because it happens in like the first episode. The young girl in the series is the one who reads the first letter.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And their kids were much younger, 5, 8, 10.
Oh, in the real story.
In the real story, and the kids are older.
They're teenage. Well, the daughter's a teenager.
Yeah, and there was no actual harassment by the neighbors. There was no preservation society. There was like a planning board that blocked the family from divvying up the property and selling it as two, and they were trying to just get out of it and get their money back. So they were trying different things, and so there was a real life like planning board for the house that blocked them demolishing it. They were going to demolish it. Like there was all these, like they were really desperate.
I do like the what Ryan Murphy did though with the use of the neighbors, because it gave that claustrophobia, and he used the neighborhood well, because in one of the letters in real life was about, look in all the windows, I might be in one.
Right. And they actually had said that there was a couple that would sit out on their front lawn in the lawn chairs or whatever, which is represented in the series. But they make that very creepy and weird in the series, where it's actually kind of a common thing in some neighborhoods to do that.
Especially in like the Midwest and East Coast, like the nosy.
For several years, I'll tell you, when my personal neighbors moved in, they used to sit out like on the curb in their little chairs.
That's funny.
And I would be like going out to my car, and you'd just like look over, and I'd wave because I'm a human.
Yeah.
And they just look at me.
Isn't that a weird?
So
that's such
speaking
a weird
of
feeling,
like
I'm
whatever.
gonna do that now to you. When you say hi Kathy, I'm just gonna look at you.
Have I abandoned my home because of it? No. Okay. There's no.
Maybe you should have.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a moment in the series where the idea of a blood cult is introduced.
Oh, Jesus.
Which I thought was really where the series kind of went off the rails. Like, it had nothing to do with anything.
I forgot about that.
And I was like, Ryan.
What I really wanted, well, and yeah, he started to go to AHS.
What are you doing?
He just started to move into.
But then they never
merge.
even really,
Well,
it doesn't even go anywhere.
It sounds like AHS eventually never goes anywhere. Which, by the way, not to digress, the new series, no, just no.
Oh, did you try?
I tried. And again, pregnancy. Here we are. And Emma Roberts pregnant. No one needs the combination of that. But Ryan Murphy, I think, should have used the real estate agent guy or he was the neighbor. I think he was a real estate agent. He was only in like 2 scenes and he was creepy as hell.
Yeah, he was. He used to live in the house or something in the series.
But in the
he represents the one that had gotten a letter in the series.
Well, and in real life,
like
he apparently had like a murder suicide on his family. That character. So like he could have done a lot more with that in the series to like increase the creep factor versus like the blood cult, because that guy was actually relevant.
Yeah, I think you might be talking about, there's 2 things in the series that I think were like inspired by characters that were inspired by real things. There's a young guy that represents like someone who lived there, got a creepy letter and then left, and he was, or a neighbor or something. He was very odd, very eccentric, and he was a younger guy. And that guy exists in the sense that there was a neighborhood person who actually had schizophrenia, was not violent, but was known to be sort of odd and eccentric in the neighborhood. Right. And that's sort of the inspiration for that character.
Right.
And then there's the older gentleman guy, who I believe you're speaking about, who is taken from a story that happened in that neighborhood, did not happen in that house, but did happen regionally close by. And it's the John List story.
Yeah, that's his name.
Who inspired the piece of the Watcher series where they talked about how there was a family that lived there and there was a murder-suicide. That didn't... So again, this is another thing that is not true about the series, is that did happen, just not in that house. And so Ryan obviously took a lot of things regionally and a lot of inspiration. So I would say this series is sort of like loosely based on true events.
It's an amalgamation.
It's really all... I can't say it's like a true crime series. I can't say any of that because there's not a lot of true crime that happens in this series.
It's a drama.
It's a drama for sure.
But it's freaky.
So there's no blood cult.
No?
No.
Oh.
Apparently not. There was also no teenage romance. There's no security guy, all of that stuff. And there's also no secret tunnels.
Oh.
So I'll set that aside. If you go and watch the series, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's no secret tunnel. There is an allusion in the letter to a basement. Like, have you been in the basement yet? But there's no tunnels or any of that. There's obviously a basement. No family that was murdered there. And actually, you know, what's interesting too is that the house, when you look at pictures of it, this is a difference as well, is it's not that grand.
No, it's not.
Like, this is a very nice neighborhood in New Jersey, but the house is not as palatial and grand and all of that as it is represented in the series. But, you know, TV and movies is, let's amp it up a bit, right? Like, that's what we do.
Right.
And also, in the series, I won't tell you how it materializes, but they solve the crime. Basically, it does wrap up. So the series is very good. It's like beginning, middle, and end. It's Ryan Murphy, and whatever you think of him, I think this is a good effort on his part. I thought it was a good story, good acting. I thought it had a good beginning, middle, and end. If you don't see it as representative of the true story, then I think you're fine. It's very enjoyable. But they solve it. Yeah. They make it, they have an ending. Whereas in real life, this is an unsolved situation.
Yes, it is.
And it's not a murder. It's not a crime. Harassment is the biggest crime we've got here.
Yeah.
So calling it, you know, a true crime or any of that.
It's not a crime.
It's not really.
It's disturbing.
It's a disturbing story.
They've ruled out a lot of people. They just don't have, you know, because there were some solid suspects. The guy that you were talking about who later was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and then finding out when it was, they assumed it was a female, then they're like, oh, was it his sister Abby, who was a real estate? And I'm wondering now if Jennifer Coolidge's character is loosely based on Abby, you know, but she was something else in that series because she still kind of does her Jennifer Coolidge thing, but she is wicked.
Yeah.
And you don't usually see that side of her.
And very sick and mean.
Oh, yeah. She's
and manipulative. I picked out like her manipulation of the wife right away because she's really nice to her at first.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, where does this go? But like a half an hour in, I'm like, oh, she wants the house. Like immediately.
Yeah.
And they did it like you're supposed to slowly realize that, but I feel like they tipped that hand real early.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Everyone's a suspect at the beginning and then they start to weed away, like, weed out the, and you realize that some of these characters are just nosy and mean and.
Yeah, so like Kathy said, there was a lot of suspects. There was the dad as a suspect. There was this young gentleman with mental illness and the sister, and they were suspicious. Some of the neighbors were suspicious and interviewed and all of that. The English teacher that's represented in the series, where part of it is that this English teacher gave his students assignments to write a love letter to a home that you really love, which I think is a delightful thing, actually. But there was a real English teacher and that was a suspect with that real assignment. So that was actually one of the through lines in the series that was actually, I mean, not accurate, I wouldn't say that, but it actually existed at least.
Well, and the kid who played the video games, the one with schizophrenia, he called himself the Watcher online. So
yeah, I wasn't aware that those were the same two people. But,
maybe not.
But yes, there was also a video game kid suspect that in the series is like the security guy and blah blah blah. But in real life, there was he was a real suspect, like Kathy was saying as well. So there were a lot of suspects and creepiness and
everyone's a suspect.
I know, but it's still unsolved. So the Watcher can show up at your house too.
You did it. You did it.
I did it.
Shannon, this is what the episode was for you to
is my admission of writing a letter to some random house in New Jersey that I have no connection to. Sure.
That's it.
Sure, Kathy, sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We hope you enjoyed this. My takeaway from this is, what's all the hubbub about?
I think for me, it puts you in a position. No one likes to feel watched. That's so intrusive and it's terrifying. And what we know now with technology is it's even easier to do than it was at that time. So it comes out at a time where everyone has cameras. Like, this is a story from 2014. It comes out in 2022. We know now, like, there's cameras everywhere, wherever we go. We already feel like we're being constantly stalked, right? The ease to which someone could just look inside your life. Your home should be your sanctuary. It should be safe. When that's threatened, that is incredibly destabilizing. And I think that's something that anyone can relate to, that feeling. So in some ways, I thought Ryan Murphy's decision to do this story and make it bigger was for that, like, intrusive, there's the horror.
Yeah, I can absolutely see why he chose it, because it's more, he made it into a story that would be a lot of hullabaloo. Like, there would be a lot of fear in what the people in the series did and what the choices they made. In real life, they chose to be much more protective of themselves and never move into the house. So,
and they didn't want a lot of press on them. They didn't want a movie. They didn't want any of that.
And that wouldn't have made a very good series. So I get that. And I think I agree with you. I think that Ryan was trying to say something about that. And our illusion of safety, it wasn't a hit you over the head message or any of that shit. But I think our illusion of safety is something that you have to look at, because your feeling of safety comes from inside. It doesn't come from outside. And like, it's kind of like all the things that people talk about, the airport safety and all that. That's just like an illusion after, all the things that the media talks to you and tells you about, like our illusion of safety. And I think that's why a lot of times we suffer in our country with so much anxiety issues, so much generalized anxiety disorder and panic attacks, is that people have struggled to feel that internal safety, because that's really all you can control.
That's right.
And I do feel like that's represented here if you choose to take it in a psychological direction.
No, I think that's absolutely true, because your mind can wander. And if you have a center where where you have the ability to find that internal safety, you can turn some of that off, which is why, you know, when anytime like during COVID and some of these bigger things that we've seen, we saw a continuum of how people responded. We're all responding to the same virus.
Yep.
But we're all having different relationships with that virus.
Very different relationships. Thank you so much. We hope you go out and watch the series. And if you have already, let us know what you thought of it and if any of these ideas came up for you. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.